Luc Bouchard with Solvac Life Coaching Services. I've been a certified life skills coach for 22 years, and I specialize in men's issues and what keeps men from having authentic relationships with themselves and with others. Welcome. Today is the 31st day of the 72-day challenge. We're in a new week. It's the 5th week, and our theme this week is how men keep themselves safe. Our daily focus is male conditioning, and the topic today is a book review by Terrance Real. The book is called, I Don't Want to Talk About It, The Secret Legacy of Depression in Men. I'm so glad that you joined me today, and this is a very important week in regards to how men function and what men do to keep themselves safe and how they distance themselves from their emotions. And I just want to talk about my intention a bit. And I believe that one of the main causes to men being unhappy comes from their learned behavior of being disconnected to their emotions and how they live, and they're not authentic with themselves. And the point about not being authentic with themselves is that if we can't do it with ourselves, how are we going to do it with anyone else? Specifically our children and our wives and our friends. But if we're not connected to self, if we're not really true to ourselves and know what drives us, what kind of lives are we living? What kind of what do we see the world around us? And how many of us live a life of quiet desperation because we're so disconnected with ourselves and we're doing things that we think we should, not because we want to, but because we're told we should do them. So my intention this week is to really shine a spotlight on men's unauthentic lives and how we suffer greatly because we've been socialized to distance ourselves from our emotions. And I suspect that this is going to make some of you uncomfortable, this topic. And if it is, I would encourage you to look at that as to how come this is making you squirm emotionally. I Don't Want to Talk About It, The Secret Legacy of Depression in Men by Terrance Real is a systematic review of how men learn to distance themselves from their emotions. And I'm going to go over some of the key points about what that process is like. And I'm going to be reading from my clipboard because I want to make sure I get all the key points. Pardon me. So, start with this book. And I'll show the book cover at the end of the video for you to look at and see what it is. So, Real starts with the idea that boys are socialized to detach themselves from their emotions. And this process is one where at one point it's okay for boys to have a connection to their emotions and to be all right, but at some point later in life, around adolescence, it's not okay. And he speaks to the idea that a 4 or 5-year-old boy can go to his mother for nurturing and to be comforted, and go and see them and cry and be upset. But half a dozen years later, that's not okay. If that boy should happen to do that, then he's a mummy's boy, or then he's tired. His apron strings haven't been detached or haven't been cut, and so there's criticism of that. And the question really comes down to is where does that change from 4 or 5 to 12, where it's okay and then it's not okay? And furthermore, that's really not the experience that girls go through. Girls can go to their mothers for the rest of their life and get that nurturing and get that comforting, and it's still accepted. And they can go to their fathers and still it's comforting. But boys are given a very clear message that's not okay. And when does that happen? And where does that get eroded? So he talks about in this process that when boys are being raised to become men, They suffer they suffer emotional and physical abuse under the guise of toughening them up. And this is when that goes on. It happens in school with peer groups. I'm not suggesting that the schools want this to happen, but it happens through bullying, which is a huge issue in our society. We see that it's becoming more and more pervasive, especially with cyberbullying and different ways that kids are bullied. But it is this idea that we need boys to be tougher, that we're going to, because they have to be real men, whatever that means. And Real talks about the fact that masculinity is less about being male and it's more about not being female. And this goes to what I spoke to earlier in one of my earlier videos about the fact that you want to insult a man, call him a woman. If you look at the common put-downs that we have upon men, they're really about identifying men as a woman and not as a man. And that's another way that we get men to distance themselves from their emotions, is that we're afraid to be a woman, or afraid to be called a woman, or show those emotions which are really designated as female emotions and whatnot. It is our unresolved trauma and shame around our emotions and the misguided beliefs around masculinity that basically adversely affects our interpersonal relationships with our children and our spouses. So we've bought into this bill of goods that we have to be a certain way, and the outcome of that is that it affects our relationships with our children, and we're not authentic with our children, and we're not authentic with our spouses, because we're not authentic with ourselves. So how can we be authentic with others? And authentic is being true to ourselves, and authentic is being honest with ourselves and going, this is how I'm really affected by this going on. This is really what's happening. And authenticity, gentlemen, is not about basically dismissal of self. It's seen as wallowing for some reason, or that we are kind of, being, I don't know what the word is, but it's authentic is about saying, this is how it is for me and this is how I'm affected. And it's not about wanting people to feel sorry for you. It's about acknowledging that this is the impact that this has had on my life. Real goes on to describe that how we cope with distancing ourselves from our emotions is really through addictive behavior, and behaviors that are about keeping us disconnected from our body, disconnected, when I say our body, and our feelings, and in our head and our intellect. And these are some of the ways that we do it, and to have that distance from our emotions and to not be living in our body. Alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, working too much. Social status is another way of basically disconnecting from our emotions. How our food, what we eat, our sports, high-risk actions, behaviors, and performance-based esteem and grandiosity. And grandiosity, when I read this, I'm going, wow, that's okay. I had to actually look up a dictionary what grandiosity is and see what that really meant, because I thought grandiosity was really magnanimous. No, please allow me, I want to get it. That's not grandiosity. Grandiosity is about basically doing this. You're here and I'm here and I'm better than you. So a grandiose behavior would be, no, let me buy supper because I make 40% more than you and you really can't afford it. But you're pointing out the fact that you have more money, so you're making someone less than. I see, once I read this book and saw grandiosity, I started to see it much more in many different places, and realize that how men shake hands is a form of grandiosity. That grip, that's like that, and do that. It's a form of grandiosity. It's a pissing contest, gentlemen, pure and simple. You're exerting your authority over other men by how hard you can shake hands. It's just dressed up as something else. So grandiosity is really, I think, the pinnacle of how we distance ourselves from our emotions, because really what we're saying is we're better than everyone else. And I know this one quite personally because that's how I keep myself safe. That's how I've learned to keep myself safe. It's through grandiose behavior and thinking I'm better, and it's through my pride. It's through my ego. And it's about the fact that you're setting yourself above everyone else. But it's not authentic and it's not real. It's a way of keeping ourselves safe from feeling vulnerable and insecure. So basically the intent of the addictive behaviors or the grandiosity and that kind of stuff is to distance ourselves from our emotions and keep ourselves safe. And that a lot of men suffer from a form of depression or depression, a couple different forms of depression through this. And his point is that depression is not okay in society, in regards to the fact that we're reaching, prescription levels at high, we're giving out more and more prescription for depression than ever before. But A, it's not okay to be depressed, and B, it's seen as a female mental health issue. So if we are men are fearful of ever being female, that's what we distance ourselves from, because those softer emotions are really what women experience. And if we're going through depression, and that's a female mental health issue, how do we resolve ourselves with that? Because if I'm depressed, then that's really a woman's state of mind, or that's a really woman condition. It's not a male condition. So we don't want to deal with the depression. We want to distance ourselves from the depression. We want to not be depressed, and we can't just will it away. So we engage in these behaviors so that we don't feel it. Addictive behaviors and other things like grandiosity, and that way we're in our head, we're not in our emotions, and we're performance-based. We're not emotional-based. We're human doers. We're not human beings. We're not being with ourselves. We're doing things to basically show everyone else, and specifically ourselves, that we're okay. And it's how we distance ourselves from our emotions so that we don't have to deal with the stuff that we're told it's not okay to feel. It's really important stuff to understand once you understand it. Real talks about that there's two types of depressions that he sees in men, and it's overt and covert depression. And overt depression is what we see from externally that looks like depression. And so it's things like lack of motivation, lack of appetite, lack of sexual appetite. There's behaviors of not being able to have no joy in your life. People are a lot flat when they're overtly depressed, and you can kind of see it because they're not their same selves, or they're really not. They're not really living. They're just kind of being. It's what I call a life of quiet desperation. And the covert depression is the false empowerment through addictive behaviors and addictive actions. So alcohol, sex, drugs, or the high-risk behaviors, or anything that's going to keep you disconnected from your emotions, and that's going to show the world that I really have it together. There's nothing on me. Don't want people to see that really you're barely coping. And so what do you do with this, and how do you move forward from this? And Real talks about the fact that it's only when men reconnect with themselves that they're actually going to get out of this state, and that they're going to be happier. And it's through reconnecting with selves and coming to terms with all the stuff that we've been denying and been told to not embrace and not accept is necessary before you're going to have any kind of authentic relationship with your children or your spouses or your friends.